Welcome to my story hour. I'm Kathy Ramsperger. I'm a lifelong journalist, humanitarian, and author of the award-winning The Shores of Our Souls and the upcoming A Thousand Flying Things. I'm also a coach who founded Ground One and created Step Into Your Story. I'm here to connect people, both readers and writers, who love books. I concentrate mainly on transformational stories of international interest, multicultural relations, and social justice that focus on the connections and sometimes the disconnections between us all. And today I have debut novelist whose novel SONJU has received much praise already, debut novelist Wondra Chang. Welcome, Wondra. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about my book and my Korean history, perhaps.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So, a little bit about Wondra. Wondra was born in South Korea, and she's lived in the United States since 1970. She began writing at age 10 under the tutelage of a writing teacher, and she wrote 5 stories every single day. That's discipline. And as a result, she won first place in a province-wide writing competition. She then studied journalism at a university in Seoul, and she went on to have a career, and now she's writing for us. She and her husband live in San Antonio, one of my favorite places. And her novel has received many esteemed reviews, including one from Midwest Book Reviews, Midwest Review of Books, and a very, very important Kirkus star. That's really amazing. I looked through all of the reviews, and I decided on the one that resonated with me most. It is by an author herself, Catherine Breck. She wrote The Hostage, The Suppliant, The Hunter, and The Good Kinsman. And Catherine says, one of feminism's many challenges is to express it in fiction without yielding to the temptation to oversimplify or over-dramatize its evolution within individual women and within those women's social and cultural milieus. When those milieus are unfamiliar to most readers, the difficulties can be compounded. That is so true. Wondra does a masterful job of guiding the reader through all of this. So Wondra's protagonist, SONJU, is a young Korean woman who comes of age in the 1940s, while her country is subjected to Japanese rule. She submits to a hasty, inferior marriage, and I wouldn't use the word submits. I almost feel like she was forced to a hasty, inferior marriage to protect her family's status, then tries to be resigned and loyal while still trying to find her own way. What lies ahead is nothing she planned and nothing she knows how to manage. It's quite the journey I want to intersperse. Without overt or official drama, she leads the reader through the thoughtful renovation of her life and at the same time, the slow evolution of her country. Without the usual spectacle of such a Cinderella-seeming story, SONJU rings with truth and realism. The reader never questions the harshness of the culture nor her commitment to it. That's quite a feat. The reader admires the small but steady steps she and Korea make together. The story is truly one of a kind, unforgettable, and deeply satisfying. I totally agree.
Thanks.
So welcome again, Wondra, and I'm wondering if you'd read a few sentences to ground us in the story before we start the questions.
Sure. I am going to read the very first paragraph because it gives you the setting. It shows the reader what period of time it is, where it is, and where the protagonist comes from. So this is the first paragraph. Seoul, 1946. At the sight of the two tall Americans in military uniforms walking ahead of her toward the Korean Central Administration building, Sonju's heart beat a little faster. A month after America dropped atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, one of her Japanese classmates in high school came to her house to say goodbye, and they had cried together. That was well over a year ago. So I'll just stop there so we can talk about other things as well. So it's right after World War II ended, after the nuclear bomb there.
I know that was the beginning of one takeover after another, one conflict after another in
Right.
Korea. And so it must have been a very difficult time to live there. So my heart goes out to the people.
I chose this period because this would be about this woman, SONJU, would be about my mother's age, maybe a little younger. I chose that period because I basically wanted to tell a story about Korea, story of Korea. And the nation went through Japanese occupation. It was always invaded by China, Mongolia, and Japan over the centuries. And my mother's generation particularly, she didn't go through the kingdom because Japan occupied Korea in 1910. And but they went through the occupation and the harsh treatment by Japanese. They treated the Koreans like second citizen. You can be the head of an organization and so forth. And the time was agrarian society. And if the reader reads my book, they will learn that it changes to an industrial nation. So it evolves. But during that period, between Japan surrendered in 1945. So she was educated during the Japanese occupation. And it ends in 69. The story ends in 1969. Between that time, there was, right after the war, Americans occupied Korea, just like we did after Iraq fell.
Right.
They did that, and then Republic was established through election. And then there was Korean War because it was divided at the end of World War II in 1945, because basically Americans and Russia brought the World War II to the end. And so there was a conflict. Korea was caught in it. So they divided into North and South. It was never meant to be permanent. It became permanent. So communist North and capitalist South. And so this is a story about her growing up in the South. So Korean War happened in 1950. And after that, there was a revolution because the government, Korean government was corrupt. And then the year after, there was a coup d'etat. And then it was a dictatorship all the way through. So she is very familiar with this sense of being oppressed, individual rights being oppressed because of Japanese, because they made the Koreans speak Japanese, use Japanese names, and they meant to destroy everything Korean, right? So she went through that already. And her mother was very stern because she comes from the old culture, old custom, because she is from upper class, right? So she wanted to keep that status, family status. So she was very stern. And there's also a backstory about her mother. But anyway, so it was a problem for the protagonist, SONJU, because she was exposed to this Western idea through Japanese education. And she reads she buys these used old Life magazines and other Western magazines, and she sees pictures and she sees, oh, these teenage people, the way people hug and things. And we in Korea, we don't touch each other, right? And daughters and fathers, they never touch. So she envisioned her life will be different from her parents. Of course, it doesn't turn out that way. That's why the story, is sustained.
Well, it's true. And it rarely turns out the way the next generation imagines it in any country, I think. I know my life certainly took a few turns, even though, well, I had a very conservative, um, blue-blooded mother. And so I'm sure there were things that happened to me that she was not fond of. So I really identified with the mother, as well as Sonju, but I never wept for the mother. So, um, what a striking cover. And would you tell us a little bit about why it was created like this and with these colors?
Well, you will enjoy this story. So my publisher wanted to write a contract right away, like 2 days after I submitted. And because it's a small indie press, it doesn't have financial resources to hire an artist to design a cover. So she picked some pictures, the stock photos that's free. So she sent me several, and I picked that because anybody who knows, even if you don't know Koreans per se, you can tell it's it's a story about another country. It's happening in another country. And for the people who know Korea, it tells you immediately it's a Korean because of the costumes that she's wearing. And I love that yellow. It doesn't look like yellow there, but let me see if it shows as yellow better here. Yeah, it does.
It does.
Yeah, it does.
I was hoping I could not have my
yeah, that's
white
fine.
spots.
So this is closer to actual color. So I love that yellow. So it pops at you, right? So then we had to figure out what font and what type we're going to use for title and so forth. So it was fun. So it didn't cost us anything.
Well, it's absolutely gorgeous, and the colors are
Thank you.
gorgeous. That yellow is just stunning, and like my camera doesn't do it justice. It's too dark, because it's very much a floral scene in the background.
Yeah, it looks like this. This is, it looks like it's closer. Yeah.
It's gorgeous. So let's talk a little bit about what's behind the cover. Could you tell us a little bit about your inspiration for Sonju, both the protagonist and the book? Did you get the idea long ago, or did you just wake up with it one morning and say, "Ah, there's my protagonist"?
No, well, I always thought I would write, but I knew my English was not, I was not ready because I didn't think I could write. Because I mean, you have to have a certain level of command of the language if you're going to write, right? So I wasn't ready.
And you have it, and I think you've always have. I think you're too humble,
Well,
but I understand that because
right.
yeah.
So I thought I was always going to write. And the way I grew up, my family was always separated because my father's job and his obligation to his parents in the clan village. So sometimes I lived with my grandparents in the clan village where just about everybody, including the teachers, were somehow relatives, right? They are related, and some are closer than others. Anyway, I was always drawn to stories because these old ladies, after the harvest is done, they don't have anything to do. So they gather together, they drink tea, eat desserts, and then they talk about stories about long ago, their parents-in-law, grandparents-in-law, always it's about in-laws because they live in this husband's family. how mistreated they were.
And always about stories too.
Yeah. And I always liked those stories. And I think it's because when I was living with my parents, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, my father taught me how to read, and he will always, if he goes to a bigger city, he will always bring books for me too. So I always read, and so my imagination goes there to those stories. So Korea is so different from America. I wanted to tell a story of a woman who grows up in such a different culture than most Americans are used to. So I came up with this idea of a woman who breaks the social norm, which was very strict under Confucian society, and what happens to her and how she takes a life journey under that circumstance. So that's what this story is about. And it also mirrors the evolution of Korea itself, because it was a very poor country when I was growing up. I remember when I was young, I lived in a small village. My father was a bank president there in a small little village. And I remember getting, I think it must be like, you donate clothes or whatever. Every time there's a disaster in the world, Americans gather clothes or what have you. It must be that.
Many times not the right clothes too.
Yeah, I remember seeing those clothes, and there was like powdered milk. It must have been carnation. They will pass out to schools to take it home to get enough protein. It was such a poor country. So to see Korea now, you realize how in such a short decades, it really have performed miracle there. So I wanted to tell a story. Yeah, I wanted to tell a story of Korea and how Korean people have struggled. And there are women, because women's rights didn't start in America; it was everywhere.
No.
And this is women's. It has feminine bent to this story. It's a woman's story, seeking her own sense of self in that oppressive, male-dominated society. So I wanted to write that book. So to dramatize that she breaks one of the big rules in that Confucian society.
It's why I love it so much, because both my protagonists are doing something taboo in their culture.
Right.
Yeah. So I love it. I love it. And she does it for love.
Yeah. Yeah.
So bravo.
Yeah. And at that time, almost 99% of the people married through arranged marriage. So the first night of the marriage, we don't, in Korea, because it was a custom, because that's how it was for the Americans. For Koreans, they don't see it as rape, but for Americans, they will recognize as rape. The first night between a husband and wife, because they're having an intimate contact between strangers, but it's mandated by the society that marriage happens that way. Yeah.
And it's still like that, or not?
Not anymore, but when I was in college, most of my classmates, even though we went to college and received modern education and so forth, most of us had married through arranged marriage. A lot of the reason is that we didn't know the boys. We didn't know how to interact with the boys, because girls went to girls' school, boys went to boys, and we were told not to talk to the boys, not to meet with the boys, and so forth. So you go to college. From my experience, I went to all girls university. My father kind of advised me to do that, because in Korea, friendships are very important, and you are not allowed to have friendship with opposite sex, basically. So he said, your friendship is going to be important. I think you should go to all girls schools. So that's what I did. And we still don't know the boys. So what we did was we drew numbers, like raffle ticket numbers, right? Two identical numbers. So
Oh,
they sell one set to the boys, college boys, and one set to the girls. And so we meet at a big place they rent, and you just look for your partner, the number. So it's by luck, it can be a cute boy, it can be a mess. So
that's
that's
amazing.
how that's how we were introduced to the opposite sex. I didn't go to that after the first time. So so naturally, and even then the parents still thought that um, this this marriage through arrangement was important, because what happens is once uh, the girl or the boy reaches marrying age, and there is some prospect, right? And the family will send out, dispatch some people to check around the background. It's like, if there's any mental illness at home, in the family, any kind of, problems in
Uh-oh.
the family. Because, Koreans really understood the genetics of the influence of the environment and genetics. So I cannot say it's always a bad thing.
Mm.
Nowadays when I was growing up, there was some hybrid. So they will introduce each other at a coffee shop, for example, um, with maybe mother and the chauffeur.
Right.
And so that's how you met the first time. And you meet again, and you get to know each other. So it's a hybrid. That's how it was at my time when I was in college. And now it's all choice, and the girls choose not to get married. And I mean, it's totally
It's
different
very
now.
much the same here, right? It's amazing that I'm writing a memoir right now about it's called My First Fiance. And I'm in a writing critique group with an older millennial and a younger Gen Xer.
Hmm.
And they're just they can't believe it,
Yeah.
because granted I'm much older than they are, but it's been decades, it hasn't been centuries.
Yeah, it changed,
It did.
yeah,
It did.
fast. Yeah.
So I am thinking that you probably we've talked a little, and you said that you went to very um, demanding universities, and then you came here, yes,
Mhm.
and then you had a career and motherhood,
Yeah.
and that's very often the way that we wait, and it's our dream that we wait. And were you writing during this time, or were you just imagining? Because you have a vivid imagination.
Yeah, I hope so. Um, no, I didn't write at all. As you said, the life of an immigrant is a very difficult one,
Mhm.
because there's so many, all of a sudden, there's so many things you have to learn so fast in order to adapt and survive, right? And the way I married an American is that during, we were very awkward with the boys, but a friend and I belonged to an American organization in Seoul called USIS. I think it's United States
Oh, yes.
Information Service. Yeah. And now I'm thinking, oh, it's information service. Maybe they were spying on us. But anyway, I don't think that's what it was. But they gathered college students and they assigned American advisors. So that was a good way to learn how to, we were told to speak in English. That was a good way to practice a conversational English, because English is a huge thing in the world. Americans take it for granted because it's a language that, but in other countries, we are required to take at least two foreign languages, and
Yeah.
English is a must. So that was a way to practice English. So I met my husband through that. He was, at one time, he was an advisor. And so we started dating because we had to, we had newsletters and we had to work hard. And so when I came here, I kind of mentioned that a little bit because one of the women come to America, married an American, and come to Austin, Texas. And she talks about her experience as a foreigner. So it was very similar to that, my experience.
Oh,
So
that's
I was
interesting to
busy.
know. That's
Yeah,
interesting to know.
that's a humorous part there. So I went to school after my son was born, continued my education, and I had to choose majors that doesn't require heavy English speaking. So eventually, later on, I became a psychotherapist. And I believe it or not, I think I really learned a lot about life, even though I went through the war. My family was pretty well off. So I didn't go through a lot of difficulties. The war, everybody went through the war, and nobody I know got injured or died that I know of.
Wow.
So I learned a lot from doing such intense therapy with people. And also there are a lot of we have to write therapy notes, a lot of medical words. It uses a lot of the Latin words, right? And a lot of English words derive from there. So
most of which Americans don't even know.
Yeah, so I picked up a lot of words that way as well. And also I have to describe the state of the emotions of the patients and all of that. So that helps.
I find that people I coach who have been therapists really understand how to develop character. And so now that I know that about you, I'm certain it's a feather in your cap, right? Because it's not just the protagonist that you nailed. It's every character is so well developed. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Another thing that's great is the reader's guide. I love this reader's guide.
Yeah.
And there's a question about suffering in life that I'd love to discuss. And it says, who would I have become without having suffered, says SONJU. So it's my belief we don't suffer. We learn more through our suffering and loss than we do our success. What do you feel about that? And what do you think SONJU would have said about it?
Well, that is SONJU's words when her friend, because all her friends were from the same aristocratic class, and so they live certain lifestyle, and the friend comes to visit, and she said, oh, you have gone through so many difficult situations. And she says, what would I have been, what would I have become without that, basically. So because I'm a therapist, I have to think about what to teach to the patients, and what a healthy psychology is, right? That's what we do. And so if you read this book, you will learn, my publisher said it's also a lesson on how to mature, how to successfully mature. That's what it shows through SONJU, character SONJU. So you go through it. And the thing about people is that we talk a lot about insecurity and self-esteem and so forth in America, especially. I see Americans as people searching, always searching. I think that's why we have so many cults and, self-help books and so forth. And it's not bad, they are searching. The thing is, you kind of have to think about where that comes from. And I told a friend of mine, she said she always feels insecure. I said, you know what? If you were stranded on an island where there's nobody, you would not have us.
Oh, absolutely. I say that all the time.
Yeah, you would not have self-esteem problems. So guess what? It's the way you see others in relations to you. And there are ways to see, because the thing to remember is everybody has something shameful they have done. Everybody. I don't care how righteous you are. Everybody has certain shameful things they have done and said.
Mm.
And so that's how it is. You got to accept it. Everybody is
Right.
about the same. And,
And move on.
that's, so move on. I mean, you are not that much different from others. So don't put yourself down. So, what difficult situation does is it can make you better, or it can um, descend you to a place you don't want to be, always blaming, feeling guilty, and so forth. So Sonju arose. I mean, she went through a lot of emotions, but she managed to climb out of that. So it also shows the character's resiliency. She's very, very resilient.
She is. I don't think many people would have made it through everything she does. And I don't want to give it away, but
Right.
um, it's one thing after another, after another, after another. So,
Right.
do you think she could have done anything differently in her life and had a different outcome? I almost think it was fated. There was very little, she was squeezed in so many different places.
I think generally, I think we live who we are.
Mm.
People roll their eyes if I say, your childhood really dictates a lot, of your life.
I don't
The
roll my
childhood,
eyes. Other
yeah,
therapists
childhood
would do the
really
same.
does. I mean, I think about this all the time. And also there's a genetic component to it. And I watch people, that's my job as a therapist. I watch people all the time, not necessarily in a critical way or judgment way, but
Right, you're
I just
observing.
watch people with curiosity. And I don't, in our field, there's always an argument of nature and nurture. It's very politically correct to say it's 50-50. I don't think it's 50-50. The more I watch people, because I have treated so many people, it's more, nature rather than nurture, because some people somehow survive.
That's true.
Right.
And people
And
in the same families, the
that's right.
same family, the same dynamic. Although your parents are always different, I understand that concept. They're always
Right.
different for each child.
So, yeah, what makes that difference? I mean, I had a friend who says, I was just flabbergasted. My sister was saying to people, all the people, we were so poor. Tell me, every summer we went on a camping, long extended camping, the whole family. We swam in the country clubhouse. I mean, is that a life of a poor family? I mean, I thought we lived pretty well. And that's how my sister, who is only 2 years younger, said that to everybody. But I believe her sister was telling the truth, the way she saw it. She might have hung out with her kids. Compared to them, she was poor. Just think about Ivanka Trump growing up, hanging out with somebody
Well,
like me. I mean, it's a totally different perception you get, right? So, about, and then I think genetically, some people are just born with much stronger, um, how would you say, they are made a lot stronger emotionally.
constitution.
I'm not talking about physical, emotionally, and they can handle things better.
Mhm.
So, uh, so that's why there are some differences among siblings on their parents who treated them the same and raised them the same.
This is fascinating. I could go on about this for a while. I want to invite anyone who is watching to put in your comments and your questions, should you have them. Um, we'd love to uh, convene at the end and see if there are any there. And if you're watching this on replay, I would love for you to ask and comment away afterwards,
Yeah.
because a lot of people now that things are open, the doors have opened, um, people are not able to come live, but do. I know you're watching on replay. I see it. Um, so I'd like to read a little bit myself now, Wondra. This is my favorite passage, and it shows not only about how SONJU is evolving herself, and it's just a little bit. Well, I guess it's more than halfway, but I have something about the middle of a book that is about mirroring, and it does that so well. It also shows the natural world and how you bring it in. I say you immerse us as the character sees it, and you do that so well. So that's another thing I love about it. So this is for anyone who has the copy. It's on page 190 to 191, and maybe I can get
Yeah.
that week onward. Sonju remained at the hall on some Saturdays and spent time with the women, sitting on a warmed floor chatting, knitting, listening to songs on the radio, and singing along and forgetting the cold outside. There's winter. In the spring, they went to Chang Duck Palace for the Cherry Blossom Festival at night and were intoxicated by the fragrance of the spring blossoms under the magic of lantern lights. Spring. In summer, they glued photographs of American actresses in a scrapbook, listened to the radio dramas, and ate melons. In the fall, they walked on the carpet of fallen leaves among the trees and looked up to find leaves of brilliant yellow, orange, and red still hanging. And in the winter, so we've come full circle, they went to the Gyeongbok Palace and threw snowballs at each other on the palace grounds, laughing and ignoring the glances of the proper people. I apologize if I messed that word up. Keep going. In spite of those Saturday activities, the women at the hall knew that Sanju's Sunday train rides were disappointing. She went to see her daughter, by the way, from afar, and that it was difficult for her not to see her daughter for such a long time. 14 years. She'd been forbidden to see her daughter for all that time. She might have told them once that it felt like a sentence to her, and fear started whispering that she might gradually forget her daughter's face, or that Jinju had changed so much that she might not recognize her daughter even if she saw her. She had to see her daughter. In early April, she passed small and large train stations along the way and greening fields in between, and when the familiar juniper fence on High Plateau came into view, she leaned toward the window. Under the old chestnut tree were two young animated boys talking to a girl sitting in a tree. Jinju, Jinju! She almost jumped from her seat. She half laughed and half cried. Her child, much grown in 2 years, was sitting on the branch dangling her legs. Jinju was turning out to be a sturdy little girl. After the train passed, for the rest of the ride, she walked the aisle up and down smiling, unable to calm down and sit. That is the most poignant scene. Do you have anything you'd like to say about it?
Well, when you write a book this long, I mean, what I'm saying, it's only 275 pages, but it covers the protagonist for well over 2 decades, so 46 to 69, 20. So 23 years. So there's a problem with time. How do you show the readers
Tell me about it.
time, right? So I employed a few things. So I talk about what they did, season by season, and it also shows her relationship with the women at the hall and what they do, their life. I also employ, you might ask me about this, but also employ letter writing. She writes a letter
Yes, let's
to her
talk
daughter.
about that. Mhm.
Yeah, like write a letter to her daughter that she will never mail because she is not allowed to have any contact with her daughter until she turns 18. So I write a letter that she writes and saves in the hopes that she will show it to her daughter when they get together. And that um, that helps the writer to show the reader the passage of time
Mm.
because I date the letters, right? So that is one way I employ to show passage of time, how she feels about her daughter and what is happening with her thoughts and so forth, and her also her growth as a woman. So it worked out very well for me because it's hard to cover and make it clear to the readers where you are at time wise.
It's very
So
difficult. It's very difficult, especially if you're dealing with more than a year or two. If it's decade after decade, and then you have backstory at one point,
right,
it's very difficult. And that's interesting that you use the letters in terms of time, passage of time, because it also was a wonderful device for me to see what was inside Sanju's mind because she wasn't going to be talking about it.
right.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. And so later on, the niece of um, her husband's niece writes after they accidentally see each other on the streets of Seoul. And she writes. So then it shows, I wanted to circle back, show the village, and also what's happening in our husband's family
And it
through
was
that
as though
letter.
she turned the pen over to her niece too. And for me, it was as though she had a mantle, like a coat, right? A cloak, and she was like, here, okay, now it's your turn.
Yeah.
That's the way I saw it too.
So yes, so it's not just a letter to our daughter, so it kind of breaks it, and so it doesn't seem redundant. um, it's too much, so it's important to know how much to use certain things over and over again.
Oh, I
You know,
think you did a great job.
yeah,
I I I feel that I was waiting for them after a while because I wanted to know where her mind stood at this moment as each major event happened, and it it makes it even more poignant. The end. The
yeah,
ending is just,
yeah,
even though I saw it coming, it was still hard to take. About Sanju's life and it paralleling Korea, it paralleling Korea's history.
okay.
Um, how did you start to think about that? And also I have a follow up that I can ask again. But do you think our surroundings shape us? Because we talked about ancestral and we talked about nature and nurture, but I'm wondering if our culture, our environment, how much do they have to do with who we become?
Well, I think the society has a tremendous influence on the choices we can make,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it's happening now in America, it's happening everywhere. And in Korea, because it's such an old country, it's about 5,000 years old, and we have gone through many kingdoms and dynasties, and it divided into three countries at one time, and unified and then divided again. And so this is what happened. The last dynasty before Japan occupied, that was about the mid 1400 AD. It was a military coup, or general had a military coup. That seems to be a story in Korea. Anyway, so because it happens a few times in recent times. So he established a new dynasty, E dynasty, and it was called Chosun dynasty. And in order to control the society in order, he wanted order in the society. Before that, it was Buddhism, because Korea is a small country, and Chinese, we even call the big country or father country. So the culture flowed from China to Korea, and then it went to Japan, because Japan is to the east of Korea. It's an island, right? So it's isolated. So that's how it went. It's very close, Korea and Japan. So before that, it was all the dynasties were ruled with Buddhism. They accepted Buddhism. And under Buddhism, from what I studied, women could divorce, women could own properties. And after the Yi dynasty, because he wanted to control the society, to make it an orderly country to rule, the Confucian, he brought in Confucianism, and he forced it all throughout the country. It has good things and bad things about Confucian religion. And so it really put women really down to the bottom of the totem pole. So there were classes, right? It dictates how each relationship should be. It dictated how the relationship between teacher and student, between husband and wife, between parents and child, all that, between the boss and employees. And so it was very structured and rigid, and you could not deviate from that, right? So it became very orderly. I mean, everybody knew their place, right? And they didn't, if they deviated, there were consequences. And that's what happens to SONJU. And so the women really lost. It's just like what's happening to Afghanistan after we left. And now they have to wear burqas, and they cannot go to school after elementary school and so forth. So when men dictated, so when they talk about, when they refer wife, they don't say wife. I mean, there's a lot of subtleties in Korean language and the way we describe social structure. And instead of calling wife, they call it interior person, because women stay inside the house, inside the fence of their home. Men are called exterior person because he goes out, takes care of business, makes decisions. The women's role is make babies, especially boys, and on the food and dealing with maids and servants and so forth. So it changed drastically. The only time women exert some power is when they become mother-in-laws. You got that from the book, right?
Yes.
They become really powerful, because what happens even now, typically in Korea, is that women truly raise their children, because men are outside doing their thing, going to work, bringing income, and so forth. So even now in Korea, women take care of the education of the child, nutrition of the child, maintain the relationship between them and the in-laws, and also maintain friendships. It's very important for Korean people, men or women. So in a structure that way, the women couldn't really exercise their own, they couldn't voice their ideas and thoughts. And when they become old and become a mother-in-law, because mother-in-law basically raised the children, they have a lot of say about how the household is going to be run. I mean, they were like tyrants, a lot of. So in Korea, we have a lot of stories about mother-in-law.
People would say that about some mother-in-laws here too. Yeah, I can see why, if you waited for power your entire life, why it would be heady once you got there.
Right. And so, we say the same thing here. Women bosses are worst for women in workplace. We hear that sometimes. It was like that in Korea. Even though they experienced it, they They
Well, it was their
perpetuate that
own
pattern.
social, that was their interior social structure. And so they adapted accordingly.
That's how it was,
Yeah,
you know.
that's just fascinating to me. And I see parallels between other parts of the world, but
Yeah.
it's still very much. Thank you for bringing in the part about Confucianism because I hadn't made that connection. So thank you for that
Yeah.
too. I want to say that a many Asian, like might be most Asian language, but I know many, have words for family members.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if, say, the word for little sister is different than little brother. I know it's different from little sister to big brother. I know they're all different words, but is it that sort of uh, etymology of?
I don't know. I don't know if it started that way with the Confucian religion because it's about relationships, right? It's
Oh,
relatedness, how they relate. And if I have a younger brother, there's a name for brother, and there's a name for sibling, younger sibling. And we also, in our language, the ending of the sentence changes depending on who you speak to. So there's a more casual one and there's a more formal one. And if it's the same age and younger between friends, you will use less formal ending. And so we can say 동생, which means younger sibling. If it's boy, younger brother, for example, we'll say 남동생. 남 means male. 남동생, 여동생, female, younger sibling. And so another thing it shows in the book is that you don't, when Korean women marry, they don't lose their last name, but they are never called by the name. It's rude to go by the name. And so since we don't call people by the name, we have like second sister, you know, the first sister, third sister, whatever, sister-in-law basically is. And so we never call them by the name.
I
Um,
loved that you brought that part in and
yeah,
didn't
I want it
Americanize
to
it.
be very authentic. It says, why don't you use the name? And no, that's not how it is over
Not
there.
how it would work. I know.
Right, right, yes. So that's how.
Well,
Something.
thank you. We're winding down now, and I want to make sure I have time to check the questions. But I want to talk a little bit about the ending without giving it away. It brought tears to my eyes, and that is not normal for me when I'm reading, especially because I read so much and have to read faster than I'd like these days. It was satisfying because of how the women who befriended her, the women that she worked with, because they took her in because she had to have work when she would. I don't know what it would have happened to her had they not taken her in. Um, and how it ended with them, even though they were perhaps in different, not all of them, but in different places, definitely different places and stages of life. And yet they stayed bonded. So in the end, it was a women's story as well.
Right.
Um, I know that my relationships with other women, other female friends, sustained me in a way during hard times that my family either wouldn't or couldn't. I love my family, but there's a different kind of communication between a family member and a daughter than a friend and a daughter. And I didn't have a sister, so that might have done it, if I'd had that.
Mhm.
Um, and I wonder how you feel about, if you have anything to say about friends in life, um, and how they stick by us or not stick by us. What's your opinion there? Because I love my women friends.
Yeah, I do too. I think I'm very close to my sisters, but and I can talk about anything. You know, once you grow up, that's the
Wonderful.
advantage. You can talk about anything, about the family and so forth. And my sisters would say, you know, you are the favorite child of our father. You know, I never felt that way, but they see that way. They all uniformly see that way. But um, you know, in a family structure, there's a lot of baggage because we had certain expectations as a child, as we grow up, and so forth. And it's a kind of system, right? Family is a system where friends, you freely chose your friends. You don't choose your family. So you have to put up with all the dysfunction in each person, or one or two. Usually there's one in the family. We call it, I think, black sheep. But you know, friends are freely chosen. In this case, I mean, you know, the friends we choose reflects who we are, because we don't become friends with everybody. You know, so in Sonju's case, they were discarded women by the society. And Lady Cho strongly identifies that. So she tries to take care of these women. And so she, under that protection, because her family has abandoned her, so she has this very strong bond with these women, and they are all in the similar situation. So they needed each other desperately, right? So that's how, and they learn to care for each other in spite of class differences and the backgrounds. And so that's how this friendship worked, and it sustained her. You know, friendship is very important for us to grow.
It is, and I love that it ended with that. So Mickey is here with us. I'm so glad to see her. And she, I'm reading because there's several comments. She says assimilation is not easy, and she also commented on interior person. Probably because my mouth went. And she also asks, can one find a SONJU, in other words, a person like SONJU, in South Korea today, do you think? Do you think she was a person of her era?
She was definitely, in general, a person of her era. She is actually a little ahead of time, right? She imagined this marriage where men and women are more equal, and that would have been possible if her mother didn't stop her. Today, there is a book called, oh, I should have looked it up. I think it's called Kim Yeonju or something, 1980 something. It's a very well-known book. And what happened was, this Korean author wrote about women's experience of this time, not that long ago. She was born in 1980 something. So we are talking about 20, 2000 somewhere. And she wrote a book about women's position, even though it came such a long way. Women are still treated differently at workplace, and women are, it's not much different from America. Women still have to carry on her chores, her duties at home. Right. So she is doing double work, and their pay is smaller too than men's. So how, in order to have a child, she had to give up her pay because her pay was lower than her husband's. So she wrote this book and sent a copy to the president. And it became an instant bestseller. She sold millions before it was translated to, because there are 50 million people in South Korea. So it was eventually translated to English. So if you look at that, because I left in 1970, and she is talking about young people in 2000, right? In 21st century. And I'm thinking, things changed a lot, but things haven't changed a lot. That's how I feel about it. I mean, you are not forced to marry through arranged marriage, as is in some of the countries still in Asia. We don't have that, but there is this, disparity between women.
It's more subtle. It's that way here too.
Yes.
We don't talk
Yes.
about it. Well, we didn't talk about it much until the past decade. Now it's really coming out. But
Right.
it's interesting. Thank you so much for that question, Mickey.
I was hearing the news because I read or hear news,
Right.
and they were talking about the word whoring. You usually describes a woman, loose woman, right? I think it was a book I was reading
Mhm.
because I listened to.
I
books
just
about
wrote a
that.
post about this.
Yeah. And why don't we call men whores? I mean, there are a whole bunch of them. It's very subtle. We don't even think about it. If there's a whore, there are men whores. I mean, there are more whores among male population than women population. So things like that, we don't really think about it because we heard it so much and we kind of bought into that.
Words are so important, and and I don't know about the word itself, but that kind of disdain for women who choose differently is
And we don't do
archetypical.
that to men. Yeah, we don't do that to men. It just, oh well, he's acting badly, or he's a dog or whatever, but we don't look at it
I
as a whore.
just had an experience like that myself day before yesterday.
Yeah. And so it's everywhere.
It is.
If you look at it closely, it's everywhere.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I want to thank Mickey for showing up and for the questions, and I'm looking forward to Mickey's book. She'll have to let me know when. And I always show Teabag Wisdom, and this one had to do with the nature in your book. I thought it was quite interesting. It's by Rosemary Gladstar. The plants, I almost said planets. The plants have enough spirit to transform our limited vision. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes.
loved that because it's something your book does as well.
Yeah.
So
I love flowers, plants. I'm not a beach person. I'm more woods person,
I'm
even
the
though I
same
don't go
way.
to woods because the bugs bother me and I swell up in welts. It's an interesting thing. We see things we like. So I'm walking with my husband, and he will not notice poppies blooming on the side,
Right.
and something blooming, and
Right.
he will find something else. And so, that's how we are. So I'm always looking at flowers on Facebook. I love the pictures of
Oh, I
flowers because
know.
of
Isn't
that.
that
That's why
wonderful?
I have a lot of that in there in the book.
So there's another reason for it. So thank you for that. So tell us what's next for you. Are you writing another book? Are you planning?
Yes. I finished the draft a few months ago. It's
Yay.
because this was going to be like about, I reduced it to 87,000 words, and it turned out to be, when it was printed, it was 275 pages. But it was going to be 130,000 words, and I cut out next 20 years of Sonju's life. So I was following her for a long time. So every time I wanted to move paragraph because that fits better here rather than here, I had to go back and make sure the time was right, the passage of time, because it's such a, it's such a,
So many, it's a
yeah,
huge
yeah,
mistake that
yeah. It
writers make.
takes so many years, for those stories to develop. So it was really daunting for me because I did that quite a bit. And so I decided to write a book that happens over 4 days, 3 protagonists, and it's going to be a short book. So
That's
I'm trying to
so
read.
fantastic. It'll be so different because this is a
Yeah,
saga.
yeah, yeah.
That's
So it's going to be more character driven.
uh-huh.
Um, so it's a challenge for me, and I wanted that. And I wrote this book. It's a story that flows. This one, and I wanted to challenge myself to do a real character study, more character driven. So it goes into the head a lot, and that's a lot harder than describing something. So I'm doing that. So I am at 42,000 words, and I would like to hit 50,000. So it can be properly called a novel. But lately, actually, I love to read short books, and a lot of good
A
books are
lot of
very
people
short.
do. A lot of
Yeah, I mean,
people do.
going to, you know, Hemingway's book, Scott Fitzgerald book, and thing in there, um, Slaughterhouse Five. I recently finished
I
that
haven't read
tour.
that one. My husband loves that book. I haven't read
Yeah,
it.
it's a great book. And there are a lot of well-written short books that's even less than 200 pages. So
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
comfortable. Yeah, I'm comfortable. So I am now polishing it, and it will be a long time before I feel like, okay, I'm happy with this. I think I'm almost done. Then I send it to my
Mhm.
to the
Your publisher, your
beta
wonderful publisher.
readers, and then I get feedback. I mean, it's a long process.
Oh,
As a
it
reader,
is.
I
No,
just revise.
nobody knows how long it is until they're in
Yeah,
it.
I revise. So that's a long process.
So I want to make certain that people can find you. So will you tell us your website and spell your name for us, and any other place you'd like to mention on social media you'd like people to find and discover you?
I am present on Facebook, so you can reach me on Facebook. Just type in Wondra, Wondra Chang, like the book cover shows.
Mhm.
And also, if you go to Google, I'm everywhere there. Next Wednesday, I'll have a big day. There is a Texas-wide literary group called the Big Texas Read, and they choose one notable author in Texas author, one a month. So it's a 90-minute interview. So I'll be on it
That's
next Wednesday.
fantastic.
Yeah, so please come.
And it will be online then. People can watch it
Yes,
online.
yes,
Okay, fantastic.
yeah,
So I'll try to get that link and put it in the comments as well afterward.
great. Because it
Um,
will be online, it will be on Facebook. I'm going to put it more often since it's only a week away, less than a week away, actually. So I'll put that out.
well, thank you so much, Wondra.
Thank you,
We're going to
Kathy.
close now, and we've gone on a while, but it's been so. It's just one of my favorite things to talk about, not just a book, but a book set in another country.
Right.
And congratulations on it. I'm
Thank
excited,
you.
and we'll wait for your second book. And to everybody out there, thanks for joining us. You can join me here every third Thursday,
Oh,
usually live, but there will be some replays depending on the availability of the authors. Like I said, things are opening up now, and I would rather get you great authors and not necessarily have it live every time. But when I'm able to do it live, like today, I will. You can find all my interviews archived on my YouTube and my Facebook page both. We're almost to 100, so we're going to keep going. And you can find out more about Wondra at her website. I will put that link and the book she mentioned below soon in the comments. And you can find more about me and my work at shoresofourSouls.com and groundonecoaching.com. I have a little surprise in a website coming soon, probably sometime in September or October. It will be unveiled. But until then, I'm looking forward to seeing you all again. And this is Kathy Ramsperger bidding so long for now, and wishing you some relaxing time in your favorite summer spot, always with a great book to read. Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everybody.